Sorry, I forgot what I was doing.
No, I do that all the time.
Welcome to Marketing Shop Talk with Garrett and Tim. Hey Garrett, how's it going today?
Good. How are you?
Hey Garrett, how's it going today?
Good. I'm doing really good, Tim. It's been a good day. How about you?
I'm doing good, thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today on our podcast. This is a podcast where you become a student of marketing along with us. Join our conversation as we learn principles of marketing from a variety of marketing books.
Yeah, and today's book is How to Become a Marketing Superstar by Jeffrey J. Fox. Not a long book, but it's a really great read. Really enjoyed it. And this was recommended to us from the marketing manager at Specialized Bicycles. Indirectly, she was visiting our shop and happened to ask what marketing book she liked. But so she recommended it, and we've read it, and it's really good. So
Yeah.
we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, let's start off in the beginning of the book. He does a really good job, I think, of starting with the basics and then breaking it down and going further into some of the details of things, which I really appreciate. So in chapter 2, he talks about deeply understand the definition of marketing.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. Both books we've read so far, our other podcasts, this one, both of them have had a chapter dedicated basically to what the definition of marketing is.
I think that's really important, though, because I think a lot of people misunderstand what they're trying to do when they talk about marketing.
Oh, they totally do, and it's really apparent. It's like this chronic disease. Like nobody knows what it is. Like I shared last week when I was applying for jobs before I started my own company. They would list this marketing job, and then you would look into it a little deeper, and it was like selling shoes.
Yeah.
Pay less, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's funny we've seen this in both books now.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jeffrey Fox really explains this definition, I think, fairly well for just someone to understand what they're trying to accomplish with it. Mm-hmm. His simple definition of it is the profitable getting and keeping of good customers.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, and he also talks in this chapter about the idea that marketing is the sustaining life force in any organization, and that every single job in the organization must directly or indirectly help to get and keep customers.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I like the idea that he brings it into not just one person's responsibility for this, but he actually breaks it down and says it's so important that everybody in the organization should be involved in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny again. In duct tape marketing, he talks about that same thing, and everything that deals with the customer is super important, and it needs to be given a lot of attention. And if they don't deal with customers, then they're probably not needed. Yeah. He
in this book he even says that they're temporary or voluntary.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So two completely different guys saying the same thing. I think that's really cool. It's interesting to point out anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, he has this chapter, chapter 5 talks about how customers fire employees every day. And this is where I think the marketing team and those people that deal directly with customers fail at their job. And he gives an example of how there was a buyer for a subdivision development construction group. Mm-hmm. He doesn't give the name or anything, but so they send their buyer to whatever company it was that sells washers and dryers.
Just a retail store.
Just stuff they need for construction. And the buyer was there 30 minutes early, and the buyer looked in the window and noticed there was 2 employees just drink coffee, chat it up, whatever. And he waves at him, and the employees look at him, and they point to the sign, and they're like, "We open at 10." One guy holds up 10 fingers and
points at his watch.
Points at his watch.
I'm not working yet.
Yeah, look at the sign. And so that the buyer left and went and bought from their competition. And he goes even further into the story and talks about how that particular business shortly went out of business.
It makes sense, right? I mean, if you're not serving your customer at all, and you're not willing to kind of step out of the normal routine of things to help someone out, that you'd be recognized as that.
As that store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
the-
and the author even goes into a little bit more detail. He talks about how do businesses become that way? Why do they suck at business, basically, right? And he lumps into a couple of things I thought was interesting. He says incompetent management, and we can see the case in this story where management didn't train the employees. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if they're a little early; you need to serve them.
Yeah.
Right. Let's see. Poor employee training. So those two kind of going hand in hand. And the other thing he lists is bad reviews. And in the book, this is like pre-Yelp, right? Google reviews. But
Yeah.
it was in the book it was word of mouth, but it can be forwarded or interpreted as bad reviews.
Yeah.
On websites.
I've heard lots of times that people are more likely to share a bad experience than they are to share a good experience.
Oh yeah, we talked about that in my college classes all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're way more likely to share a negative. So just the thing with this chapter when he sums it up is the customers pay the bills and you need to serve them. And we'll go more in depth with it later, but I mean they're the reason you're there, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, just
Can't
super
have a
important.
business without a customer.
Exactly. Even morgues have customers, right? Anyway, so you talked about how you liked. Oh no, it's me this time again.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm the next chapter. All right, we'll get this podcast figured out. So chapter 7. This one is called "The Customer is Not Always Right."
Wait a second. Didn't you just say that we need to have customers and take care of them, though?
I did,
Okay.
and now I'm not saying that.
Does this contradict what we just talked about?
No, surprisingly. So, because when I first read that, I was like, "What the heck?" Like, you never hear that. The cliche is they're always right. So, to talk about this in chapter 6, he talks about the right customer, and chapter 7 expounds on that. But he wants to correct that phrase to saying the right customer is always right, not the customer is always right. So, for example, as I was reading this chapter, I started to reflect on what it was like to have a bad customer when I worked in retail, and this particular story is when I was working in a bicycle shop. So we had this customer that was notorious for coming in and wasting time, and he'd always want to talk to this one employee all the time and just waste his time. After a while, he would buy things occasionally, but it was few and far in between, and it certainly wasted more time than he didn't pay for himself, basically. Yeah. And so one day he decides to come in and he buys these really expensive Maxxis tires. It's crazy expensive, $80 a tire for a bicycle. Wow. And to put that in perspective, you can get tires for bicycles for $30, right? So. Anyway,
I could get them for cheaper.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Depends on where you look, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, he buys these really expensive tires, and as he's paying for them, he mentions to this employee that he's talking to, the one he liked to talk to all the time.
Yeah.
He mentions that he's gonna go buy a TV later that day, and the customers or the employee's like, yeah, cool, yeah, all right, you've wasted my time enough, you can leave now,
Yeah.
He didn't say that to his face, but so he left, and then the customer left, and a couple of days later, this customer calls back, and he was like, hey, these tires they won't stay up, and so he brings them in, we check them, the tires is fine. He leaves, he calls again, they're flat again. He comes back, we check them, the tires are fine. He leaves, and then again, a third time, he comes back, complains that the tires won't stay up, right?
Stay aired up.
Yeah, they won't stay haired up. And we look again, and again, there is nothing wrong with them. And so finally, the owner, he handled this really well, but he told the customer, he was like, so, I know you bought a TV, and I know you want the money back so that you could pay for this TV. He's like, this is becoming a problem. So I can work out this exchange for you this one time, but please don't do this again.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly how he did it, but and we've since seen that customer. He didn't burn any bridges or anything, but I thought that is a prime example of how the customer is not always right.
Yeah.
Like just a perfect example of that. I mean, good customers can be difficult too. They can be tough, exacting, as the author says, demanding, needy, finicky. But if they're paying the bills, if they're paying for themselves and your bills, they're worth it. They're worth that trouble.
Yeah. If the business can survive by serving them, I think that's the idea of it, right? It's like you can't use up all your resources on poor customers or bad customers because you wouldn't be able to stay in business. But you want to be able to serve the customers that really appreciate your business.
Yeah.
Like they have a relationship with you and those types of things. So I think that's probably the most important part of that is realizing who your good customers are and supporting them as best you can so that you can continue to grow as a business.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, which kind of leads into something that I thought was really interesting. Chapter 9, he talks about, the title of that chapter is "You Must Love Your Brand," and this is something that I have struggled with with my career in marketing, is because there's sometimes that you have services or products that you're trying to market, but you don't really connect well with them, and how important it is for you as a marketer to find a brand to promote that you really connect with, that you feel a part of, that really becomes a part of you, which I think is really important. He even says, a marketing superstar is the custodian of the brand. Not only the brand, but the image, the equity, the promise, the future.
Oh yeah.
And that you must believe in what your brand means to its customers. I think not only does it helps you as a marketer to have a brand like that you're working with.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because one it just gives you more fuel to put into your effort, right? It kind of guides you through it. And if you're already living the brand, with the same principles, same values, same vision as an individual, that you kind of would be a good word for that. You connect.
Yeah,
with it.
you connect. And I see exactly what you're saying, where you're going with it. I mean, if you go into a retail store and they sell, two brands, like Best Buy. This will be a good example. Go to Best Buy, they have an Olympus camera and an Nikon camera, and if the salesperson doesn't like the Olympus, then they'll talk you into Nikon.
Yeah.
And so they didn't believe in the Olympus, and so therefore Olympus lost the sale. Right?
Yeah.
That's where you're going with it?
Yeah, that's a good example of it. I mean, in a place that you sell two different brands like that, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he points out really something that I thought was key, is the idea that if you don't love it, then you're most likely just managing it. So you might be taking care of the administration work, doing all the things you're supposed to, but he says that leads to mediocre marketing.
Oh yeah.
And it also, it will guarantee a lackluster performance.
Yeah. I mean, you want to find something that you're excited about. You want to find something that you think about when you have nothing else to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what you want.
He has a really good example in here of Snapple.
Yeah, the Snapple story. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this Snapple starts out. I can't remember the location that it started. I think it was somewhere near New York or that area.
Yeah.
And they had this really fun, quirky, friendly brand that they started with these unique combinations of mixed drinks, I guess. And they were doing pretty well, but they had a distribution problem. It sounds like they needed to sell for some reason.
Right. Yeah.
Like they couldn't quite grow the way they wanted to. But they ended up selling to Quaker Oats,
which is a big sell for them. I'm
yeah,
sure.
Yeah. And I'm sure Quaker Oats thought, this is going to be easy to distribute this to, the channels we already have available to us. The problem is that they didn't keep any of that quirkiness.
Yeah, like they lost the Snapple lady.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then got rid of a lot of that quirk that went with it.
Yeah, so they totally neutralized the brand, which lost the personality completely, and then they ended up having to sell it at a loss to another group that really appreciated the fun, quirky friendliness of
the old Snapple.
Yeah, so they brought it all back.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, they brought it all back because they brought that personality back in the Snapple lady.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's a great example of how you can love the brand and stay true to the personality of it.
Yeah, and I think, it just comes down to that attitude. If you love it or not, and if you don't love it, then you should probably get rid of it and find something else.
Yeah,
because it's not going to do you any good.
I do think it's interesting too to point out that if you're taking over something that's already been marketed for a while, that you don't necessarily, just because the person before you loved it, doesn't mean that you're going to do the exact same thing that they did with it. So you can take it in a new direction. It's just it would go along with your personality as well. I think sometimes we have to be careful of that because we don't want to put too much of our personality into the actual products and services that we're selling as marketers. Because
then it's hard to duplicate, or.
And I think it's just the idea that you have to make sure that it fits the customer. Because that's the thing that I think you need to be more worried about when you're directing it, marketing, when you're loving the brand, is obviously if you love the brand, it's part of you, but you don't want to just make it be all about you. Again, it's more important to connect with the customer than it is to try to deviate from what was already done.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It's just the brand needs to have kind of its own identity and its own life.
Yeah.
And it's important to keep that. And part of the personality of a company is what people buy.
Definitely.
Right? Like people that buy, I guess, Snapple. I guess, who like the personality of the company. They like the flavor. They like the things that they do. Where if you have somebody that likes Pepsi, they like the carbonation. They like they like that stuff, and so if you can keep the brands true to their personality and their customers, then or I think that's what you're going with.
Yeah,
right?
It definitely is.
Perfect. Awesome. So to kind of go along with that is later on in the book the author talks about how so you have this brand and you have this product that will do good or is doing good. Talks about that's great and all, but now you need to price your product. You need to get money somehow so you can keep making it, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, so having the personality is great and all, but now you need to make money. And so he talks about price to value. And what he means by that is pricing to value. You're not trying to be super greedy, but you need to make it enough to make the business sustainable. So what you need to have to be able to do it is have good customer knowledge. Oh, it's bedtime. That's my alarm to put my kids to bed. Anyway, so you need to have good customer knowledge. You need to understand what he refers to as dollarization skills, which I'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
And the third thing you need to have, which I thought was creative, is courage. And I'll talk about why I thought that was creative, but I thought that was really good. So, customer knowledge and dollarization value. He gives a really good example of this. He talks about a construction worker that needs to be able to drill a lot of holes. And so says the marketing superstar needs to figure out the value of all these holes, right, for this drill. And so if each hole, if you calculate, is worth 10 cents to the customer, and they need to be able to drill 1,000 holes an hour, then so each hole is 10 cents, they need 1,000. That means you need to price your drill at $100, basically, right? Kind of a simple example. And that's the dollarization skills, is figuring that out. And figuring out that the customer really values the amount of holes they can drill in an hour. So, but courage, this is where I wanted to talk a little bit, is I've seen this with some of my clients, is the lack of courage in pricing something. And they talk about how they're not trying to be greedy, you know, which is good. You want to be greedy. Greedy's bad. Yeah. But we need to price things that are worth their value. Like I have a client who sharpens beautician scissors, and he's afraid to charge what a lot of other sharpening businesses are charging, around $35. But he's charging so little, like it's almost not worth the time to do it. He should just work overtime at his main job.
Yeah, and I think that's where marketing can really help out, though, is the idea of how are you presenting, you know, the solution to the problem. Like the idea of the holes drilled. You know, it's not that they need the drill bit, they need the holes drilled, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea of it. So, and you think about, like, if a beautician is using scissors as part of their income, part of their services, you know, they're making money on that as well. So it's an interesting aspect, and I think a lot of people overlook this when they're pricing things. They're pricing their products or services. They don't actually, and it took me a long time to realize and to appreciate the value of the things that are offered, whether it's product or services, for the different companies that I've marketed for. I mean, it's important for you to realize, one, you know, that you can still sustain your business, but two, I mean, you have to really understand your customer, like you talked about, and then be able to reverse engineer, you know, that pricing so that it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I like what you said there too. They're not buying the drill bit, or they're not buying scissors. They're buying the capability to cut hair. They're buying the capability to drill holes. Yeah, that's what they're buying.
Yeah.
So I like the way you said that, and that's the value that you need to figure out and price it, and be. I mean, if you're priced fairly, you don't need to apologize for it. I mean, like I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent, but in the book, in another chapter, it talks about Pablo Picasso, right? The artist. Yeah. So just to it's great. I love this story. It's so fantastic. Person sees Picasso in a restaurant, super excited. Walk up, hey Picasso, I'm your biggest fan. Can you draw me a picture? So he's like, yeah. He pulls out, draws on a napkin.
I think it took him a few requests to actually.
Yeah, probably a few. I'm trying to sum it up, but he draws it, and they're talking, and the drawing's done, and the person reaches for it, and Pablo's like, that'll be $10,000. Yeah. and he makes the point that, you know, it took him a couple of minutes right then.
Yeah, the patron complains, like, that just took you 5 minutes. You just drew that in the last 5 minutes.
You do.
I'm not paying $10,000.
I know. And Pablo's like, no, it took me 40 years to be able to do that. And that's the, you know, price to value. Yeah. I mean, I'm not an art aficionado, but that was the value.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that patron there, she didn't want a picture drawn by herself of the same thing, right? Right. She wanted it from Picasso.
Right. Of course, because it's got the prestige, right?
Yeah. The value in it.
Exactly. Yeah. Which we could get into a whole another conversation, just the value of a brand, you know. Yeah. Why do people buy Porsche? Because it's a Porsche. Yeah. I mean, you know, it might be a terrible car, but it's a Porsche, you know. And I'm not much of a car guy either, but there's that whole value as well.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think of it, if you're buying a car, and the car is just to get you to point A to point B, in a reasonable amount of time, there's lots of things that can do that, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a fancy car. It doesn't have to be an expensive car.
Right.
It doesn't have to even have,
4 wheels?
Yeah.
Like a 3-wheel car?
Yeah, you can. They have some of those.
Yeah, in Europe, didn't you? Or bicycles.
Yeah.
Or if you're rich, helicopter.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. From point A to point B, and it's just whatever you value in getting there.
Absolutely. So, I just jumping back. I just thought it was really interesting that he talks about courage, and I do find a lot of small business owners are fearful of asking for money.
Yeah.
Which I mean, it can be a tough thing. I understand, but you need to have that courage. So.
Yeah, I think part of it is the idea that they're concerned about losing customers. So
right.
So if you have too high of a prices, they'll lose customers. Things I think that they don't realize is that by pricing your things to the value you're actually providing, pricing your services or product to the value that you're providing, you will attract the correct customers. You'll get the margins that you need to be able to sustain your business.
Right.
So.
And you're trying to find the right customer, not all the customers.
Yeah, you might reduce the actual quantity of customers, but the quality of customers will improve. So there'll be repeat customers. You will have to do less for advertising because they'll return to you because you have the same.
Right.
Same
well, and then they'll do
value.
some of your marketing too. They'll refer people to you.
Yeah.
Which is what you want, right?
Most definitely.
So,
That's the cheapest form of advertising.
That's right. So this is a perfect segue into this other chapter I want to talk about, chapter 12. It talks about the folly of price cutting, which goes into this courage thing, right? People don't want to charge a lot because they don't want people to think they're greedy or they just feel bad or whatever. But price cutting, the author says it's really great. He says, price cuts start price wars. Wars wound and kill. Price wars wound and kill all combatants.
Yes.
And it's true. He also talks about how there is always somebody willing to go out of business faster than you, and when it comes to a price war. And unless you're Walmart, it's not going to be good for you.
Yeah.
He talks about if you're trying to compete, you need to have courage with your pricing. But you need to compete with things like product quality, innovation, service, advertising, salesmanship, tech service, location, merchandising skill, and, this was the best one, employee attitudes. We talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
But that is huge. I mean, if you can get the people that sell your product to really love your product, I mean, that's key. That's totally key.
Yeah, there's nothing better than having a good group of employees that are on board with the brand.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, this is just kind of a point I thought of just now. But so if you have your believers, even if you have a hiccup, maybe you change distributors and the green on this part isn't the same green that it used to be, or whatever. I mean, if you can get, if you can do a good product, and you have people that really love it, I mean, you can get some forgiveness if there's a hiccup like that too.
Yeah.
Of course, you need to correct that, or you'll lose your believers. But just the attitude is really important, because if there is a hiccup, then you can have some forgiveness.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. So anyway, there's my knowledge for the day. Anyway, let's see, where are we at? That was chapter. I think it's your turn, Tim.
It's my turn.
Yeah, 14.
Yeah. So 14 kind of goes along with one that you presented earlier, the idea of pricing on value. This one talks about those always sell consequences. So, and when you're actually having a conversation or putting something in advertising, that you want to present what the customer would be losing rather than what they're gaining from it.
Yeah.
That he actually says that the fear of loss is much stronger than what you'd actually get from somebody wanting to get gain.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I do remember that part of the chapter, but he's right. I mean, like going back to the drill bit example, if you know, if you can't drill, you can only drill 500 holes with this other drill
With the
bit.
competition.
Yeah, but if you buy mine, you get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they lose 500 holes, right? An
Right.
hour.
Uh huh.
Yeah. So he says every benefit for every product can be dollarized, which you talked about, right?
Uh huh.
So we should show the economic value and present it as savings to the customer, which I thought was a really interesting way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting is it makes it sound so critical, but he says fewer than 5% of all marketers ground their product claims on benefits to their customer.
Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is definitely, it makes you think that there's not a lot of thought and process going into creating marketing for most small businesses, if that's the case.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And even more important, though, he says fewer than 1% actually put the value in numbers, and they sell with that. So sell with the numbers. So calculate out, and he uses the word dollarize again, you know.
He uses that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, which I think is actually really beneficial, and I think a lot of companies are afraid to do that, where they don't think that they can do it accurately. It's kind of the perception I get from a lot of business owners.
Yeah.
From my experience is that either they think it's going to take a lot of time, or they're going to get the number wrong, or something like that. Because not a lot of people not a lot of businesses put time and energy into calculating that out. But it is so helpful as a marketer because it gives you a basis to start. It gives you something to say.
Yeah, it totally gives you something to say. And then, I mean, the customer, if you're giving them numbers, they can do the math and figure it out too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they don't have to just take your word for it if they don't want to.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's really important. I mean, when I do my my research for businesses, I give them everything. Like I'll cite everything, and so if they don't believe me, well, hey, you got to check it out. I mean, here's the citation. You can go look at it.
Here's the report that tells you.
Yeah, exactly. And being able to prove it is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely
Absolutely.
is.
Absolutely. I really like that a lot.
So we've got a few more chapters to look at, right?
A few more chapters. I think it's my turn now.
Tag, you're it.
Tag, yes. I'm it. Okay. I hated that game, by the way. I could never get anybody. Okay. So this one I thought was interesting. And I totally agreed with it after I read it.
Yeah.
But this is chapter 19, never use we. That's what he says. Never use it. Never use words, I, me, we, us, or our. Because you're talking about you, your business, your product. Customer doesn't care about that. They care about the benefit they get from what you sell. That's what they care about.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I mean, it's something that it makes sense to me after I read it too. You know, I with all the advertising that I've ever made, I kind of had to like think back. I think I probably made that mistake hundreds of times.
Well, I've made them too. I mean, that's just not something I thought about.
Yeah.
But he's absolutely right. They care. The customer cares about them and the benefits they will get. No, they don't care that I do X, Y, and Z. Like they just care about the benefit. And I just thought that was really interesting. And the point that he makes with this is you wouldn't put me on your business card. So don't do it in your advertising. don't do it on the business card. Talk about the benefits they gain. Like what we just talked about.
The consequences, the value.
The consequences, the value, the prove it. That's what they care about.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was really interesting because I see we all the time now. Like when I look at advertisements, it's like this. Like it just stands out. I don't know how else to describe it, but it is a chronic problem.
Yeah, and again, I think it just kind of goes back to the idea that that one, marketing is confusing for small business owners that aren't into marketing themselves, and that idea of they just kind of follow the crowd and they kind of just do the best that they know how. Which I think, if any of them picked up one of the books that we've been reviewing, I think that they would greatly benefit from even the smallest detail. That even the first couple pages, they would learn
totally
a lot to help them out.
Yeah, I totally agree. And speaking of learning, I learned another thing in this book.
What's that?
I learned from chapter 23 to not put your phone number on your truck or car.
Why is that though?
Well, that's what I thought. like how are they gonna everybody does it.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was really interesting. He says it's a waste of money because when people see your truck go by, they're not like, oh my gosh, wait, let me get my pen out, write this down. They don't even, a lot of times they don't even have time to pull out their phone and take a picture of the car because he talks about your car or truck is your moving message board. Emphasis on moving. It's not that often people will be able to see it. Now, granted, you could be parked and whatever, but what he says is important is having your name and where you're from and your logo.
So name and location.
Yeah, name, location.
And
that's the important thing. And then they can Google that. They can Google it from there. He says that the exception to this rule is if you have a really easy number. Like, have you ever been to Vegas?
Not for a long time.
Okay, so when you go to Vegas, you'll see lawyers' numbers everywhere, and it's like 555-5555. and then it's okay to put the number up.
Yeah.
Or he gives an example of if you're a bug extermination guy and your number is 1-800-ZAP-BUGS, and you spell it out instead of writing the number. Those are the exceptions to the rule, but really just your company and where you are, and then they can Google you there from there.
I even think if you might have an easy phone number to remember, that some people might think, that's so simple, I don't know if I remembered it correctly.
Yeah, I guess that's true too.
And they wouldn't want to call just so they don't call the wrong number.
Yeah, no kidding. But I did find that interesting because that is another chronic problem I see everywhere.
Yeah. Is
phone number. And he's right. After I read this, I started to try and remember phone numbers on trucks, and I can't.
So do you think the same thing would apply for a web address? We talked about this book being a little bit older.
It is a little older. I think if you have a good, easy to remember web address, but it's very complicated at all, and I'm not.
Yeah.
Then just make yourself available on Google. Make your name and your logo memorable, and then they can find you on Google easier.
So just indicates or just emphasizes the idea that a web presence is so important these days.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even just a Facebook page. Now, I think that having a website certainly has its merit. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
But at least a Facebook page.
Yeah.
At the minimum. And sorry, I'm still. I got this cough that won't quit. Two, if you have a Facebook page, I found this. I was doing a report for one of my clients, and I was looking at the competition, and I noticed that none of them. They all had Facebook pages, but none of them had hardly anything on it. Or they all post the same thing, this is for sale this week. This is for sale this week. Oh, this is for sale.
Weekly specials, huh?
Yeah, weekly special. They're all the same type of thing. And you go to the about side of the Facebook page, and it was we sell such and such. Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
So where I was going with that is if you're not going to have a website and you're going to have a Facebook page, you got to make it a
Put some
Facebook
effort.
page.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually write things in the about section. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. That kind of goes along with the last chapter I think we're going to talk about tonight, and is is chapter 27. It says, "Be your own customer."
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that that's an interesting way to look at auditing your business, your marketing. That's kind of what I refer to it as, like the idea of go through all your marketing material and pretend you're the customer. And even, not just pretend, but if you have a phone number that you call in, pretend you're a customer. Use some of he kind of talks about the idea of using some of your customer feedback you've already got.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe someone didn't get an answer to their question. He says, ask that same question and see how long it takes for you to try to get that answer. See how helpful, the customer service people are, and those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he says not only with calls, but, take your customer surveys yourself. Follow through and do everything, do all of the steps that your customer has to go through. Even send yourself one of your invoices.
Right.
And take a look and see what it looks like.
Yeah.
What kind of experience is the customer having when they receive those types of things?
Oh yeah.
Every contact that you have.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point that he made. I mean, especially, so you send an invoice, right, and you decide to print it on the cheapest paper you can find.
Yeah.
Well, what if by the time it gets to the customer, like it's all, how sometimes things will
the ink bleeds or something.
The ink will bleed, or you'll fold it and then it'll. Yeah. I mean, you won't notice those kinds of issues unless you go through the step. And I think that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, and I think if you don't do anything else, I mean, this is one of the most practical things you can do as a business owner, or as a marketer, is go through and be the customer yourself, and experience it, because that will give you tremendous insight into what your customer's going through. You'll start to see things that you can improve quickly. Right. And things that might take a little more time, but still you'll know that they need improving. It'll give you a direction to start working in your business. Yeah,
and I think this has merit no matter what size of business it is, how involved you are in the business process or not. I think it has benefits for the business owner as a one-man show. I mean, yeah, it's definitely. Yeah, I think it's got merit even at a scale that small. Overall, fantastic book. I mean, I really liked it. Yeah, I liked that it was concise. Yeah, it was to the point. It didn't have a lot of fluff in it. I mean, it did cover some topics more than once, but it added to it each time. Yeah. So, and the chapters are real short, and it allowed him to Jeffrey Fox to kind of add to it as you go through the book. Again, though, I think even if you want to learn some principles of marketing, you don't have to get very far into the book, and no, really, you can learn quite a bit from him. Yeah, you can, and it's a quick read, and I recommend it. I mean, it's got a lot of really great points. Yeah, most definitely. Really, really good. We didn't share everything, obviously, but we didn't want to share everything because we want you to read it. Yeah, get the book yourself. Yeah, get the book, read it. It's really good. I think it'll have a lot of great points, and if you have any comments or questions, leave them below. I think we've decided to post on YouTube, right? Yeah, for right now, that's where we're going to be. Yeah, so put the comments below, and we'd love to chat. And if you have any books you would like to recommend to us, please do, right? Yeah, we'll definitely give you our opinion about them and point out some good principles that people can learn. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm Garrett. And I'm Tim. Thanks for listening to Marketing Shop Talk.